Well, I think it's important to first start at the beginning, right? So we began this process 5 years ago. Well, actually 4. 4 years ago is when, as a community, we began this process. So we had an ed specification study, and the ed specifications really identified numerous options. And we engaged the community in examining those options. And we really narrowed it down to 2 options. And again, engaged the community. And the community resoundingly identified the desire and the commitment to keep the middle school in Chestertown proper. And so the board endorsed and voted on that option with full community support. So I think it's important to understand that this has been a multi-year process. This is not all of a sudden. The board did not make this decision in isolation. The board made it with extensive engagement of the community, extensive analysis, and a thoughtful, deliberate decision was made that was supported by our community. And all of that happened over a series of years. So this is not a surprise. This is a course of action that we as a whole community have been on for several years now, to the point that in this past year, we have already used taxpayer dollars, state funds, to pay for the design and engineering process. So we have been actively working on the blueprint, designing the blueprint with the architects for just about a whole year. In October, it will be a full 12 months. And I have been providing updates all along the way, both to our commissioners as well as through our Board of Education meetings. And so I think it's important to, again, know this has been a multi-year process. Community has been engaged. We have been providing transparency and updates along the way. And we are really now at a critical moment where if we stay on schedule, shovels should be going into the ground late winter, early spring. That's how close we are to this next significant step. And while I know lots of folks want to diminish the argument here to lots of different arguments, what I would offer is this is a defining moment for us as a community. We will either choose as a community to invest and renew our school system, symbolized in a new middle school replacement building, or we will do the very least we can, which is to relocate our kids to an old elementary school that was not purposely built to be a middle school, that lacks an appropriate gymnasium, that lacks appropriate science classrooms. So this is really the question on the table. As a community, what are we committed to doing for our children and for our school system? That's the question on the table. The nuts and bolts of how we get to that, as leaders, we can figure that out. That's what leaders are called to do. They're called to figure out how we make things happen for the community. Not to say it's too hard and we're going to give up and do the least thing we can do. Well, I think there's a couple things in terms of the financial challenges of building a new replacement building at our current Chestertown location. And that is the course of action that we have been working on. So let's kind of go down that path before we discuss Wharton. Currently, the state cost share formula has Kent County paying 50% of the eligible square footage and the state paying 50% of the eligible square footage. It's important to understand this concept of what is eligible square footage, because it's not the percentage of the total project. So the easiest example is take a gymnasium. The state will cover 50% of the gymnasium because it's an instructional space. It's where we teach, physical education. So it's instruction. And they would cover half of that. But the extra space needed in a gymnasium to, let's say, support community basketball games, the bleachers and the seating, that is not eligible for state funding because that's a community option, right? That's not relevant to instruction. So I use that as the example to understand, because most people are thinking that cost share is about the cost of the total project. So I think there's, just to try to help clarify everyone's understanding. So the state has us at 50-50 percentage. We have already shifted that percentage to be 60-40 because we qualify for an additional 5% from the state because all of our students are so impoverished. Every one of our 5 schools qualifies for concentration of poverty and community eligibility program, which is free meals for breakfast and lunch for every student every day. So because of our level of poverty in our student population, we qualify for an extra 5% from the state there. We also qualify for an additional 5% because the age of our school facilities and the level of maintenance required, because our youngest building is our high school right now, and that was built in 1973. So it's been over 52 years since we have added a new facility, for students to be in. And so with that, we qualify for another 5%. So that right there puts us at 60% of the state paying, 40% on the locals. In addition to that, this year, in working through the legislative process, we were able to get the entire General Assembly to pre-authorize an additional $8 million from the state to put towards our project. That's grant funds, essentially. The Assembly has agreed to that. What a pre-authorization means is that the Assembly approves it, and the final step in that is for the governor to finalize that process. Now, the governor did sign on the budget last year, which included that pre-approval. So, people want to argue, well, that's not guaranteed. No, it's not guaranteed, but we do already have, the governor knows that was a pre-approval from the General Assembly. So it's not a totally unknown element out there. And in addition to that, the Interagency on School Construction, often referred to as the IAC, gave us an additional $3 million this year for the first year of construction that they didn't have to give us, but they did. So that right there, we're already shifting that percentage from 50-50 to being more on the state end and less on the locals. That's, if anyone's been watching the commissioners meeting, we've been talking about what is the percentage, right? Because we didn't really have a hard number. I would argue we have a ballpark number now. The commissioners just this week said, an 80-20 would be, they'd be pleased with an 80-20. And so I don't know if that's possible or not, but I appreciate their partnership in giving me a target to work towards. And we certainly will continue to work with the state to try to acquire additional funding. We will work that issue until the very last moment. But I do want to be clear, we have shifted that percentage, and the state is coming to the table with additional funds already, and we'll continue down that path. Now, in terms of Wharton, right, this idea of the best we can do for our kids is build a new facility that really symbolizes a renewed commitment to our school system and our children. The very least we can do is just shove them over into an old elementary school. And that elementary school has a lot of work that needs to be done. The roof needs to be repaired. We know that's roughly about $2.2 million just to fix the roof there. It does have mold issues. And so there needs to be ventilation system work, and the boiler system, only half of the boiler system is currently operational, which is fine for right now because we have our transportation team in there. And so they only use a small portion of that building. And of course we have them in a section of the building where the boiler is working and the air ventilations are working. So it's not really like, okay, just open the doors and we move in. Again, some of the additional repairs, the gymnasium, for anybody who's been in Wharton Elementary, it's the elementary, I call it from Seinfeld, the gym-a-cafetorium, right? So it's a gymnasium that's also the cafeteria, that's also the auditorium. So it's not a full-size gym, which doesn't meet the standards for physical education for middle school students. So we would need a full-size gym. Plus, that's where we have lunch. So you can't have gym classes and lunch in the same space at the same time. Not to mention if you have band that may be using the stage, right? So there's an instructional conflict. The facility is not purpose-built for middle school requirements. There are no standard science classrooms, right? So you can't implement the appropriate middle school science courses in those elementary classrooms because they're not designed for that. All of the restrooms actually also need to be upgraded because they have the toilets for the little children as opposed to, adult-sized toilets. So there's more involved to that. People might argue, well, just walk them across the parking lot to the high school. The high school gymnasium is in its own usage. They have a full schedule in which that gymnasium is used as well. Not to mention the instructional time that's lost walking across and walking back. You're really talking about 20 minutes of lost instruction every time. So again, on the surface, that seems like a simple solution, but it's much more involved than that superficial solution. Another thing for anyone who goes back and looks at the feasibility studies and the options, right? Because one of the options said create an 8th grade academy at the high school, put the other kids at Wharton Elementary. If you actually look at that option, that wasn't putting the children in the current Wharton building. That was building a new building on the Wharton location. So when you do the math on that, that is every bit as expensive, if not more expensive, than just doing a replacement building in our current location. And so I think that's part of, again, on the surface, sure, that sounds ridiculously practical. When you get into the truth of it, the truth is that's not a cost effective, and it goes against what the community said they wanted, which was to maintain the school in the town.